Stay hungry, stay foolish. A quote which you probably would have heard. A quote which is coming from an iconic legend who has sort of captivated generations beyond. As you have probably guessed it through the thumbnail, we are going to talk about the iconic Steve Jobs. And I like to call the title of this video as Job Hacks. In the sense, what are the practical hacks which Steve Jobs gave to the modern day, gave to all his followers, gave to all the people who adored him for the personality he was. Roughly about 9 months back, I had made a video on my channel of what are the overarching aspects, what are the overarching learnings which you and me can learn from this legend. But I felt that there are certain nuanced learnings, certain learnings which need a little attention to ponder upon, which is going to be the crux of today's video. We are going to talk about the nuanced learnings because it's, as it's always said, the detail, the eye for detail, the detail holds the key. So there are learnings which are very nuanced, and I thought I should really make a video on this particular aspect of Steve Jobs, which probably is not highlighted, which is probably not spotlighted much. Sure, we have all heard of Steve Jobs' capability to bend reality, his drive for innovation, his relentless drive for innovation, his obsession for mastery. But there are certain nuanced aspects which not only will help us in our professional life, it is sort of a learning for us in every dimension of our life. So my today's video is an humble attempt in that direction. So let's get started without any further ado. So if you have ever heard of the famous Stanford speech, first thing, if you haven't heard of that Stanford speech, I will highly recommend you to go and listen to the Stanford speech, that famous Stanford speech. And one of the things which really captivated the audience of the speech was the fact that normally when people come who are accomplished, right, who are really accomplished in their walk of life, in their industry, they come and give a speech on all their achievements, all the grandiosities they have achieved in their professional journey. But to their utter surprise, here was a man who was only mostly talking about his failures. Which brings me to the first hack which you and me can learn from Mr. Jobs is the power of being vulnerable. Now this might be very unconventional because society sells us a narrative to showcase our best selves. Society tells us to always look strong, to always showcase your strengths. But Steve Jobs was a mark apart. He was completely different. He was shameless enough, or I should probably rephrase that and say he was courageous enough to be open about his weaknesses, to be open about his limitations and flaws. And this is the signature quality of icons, of titans. Because we have always been sold this narrative that we need to be perfect, front of the world, no matter how deeply flawed we are. And guess what? When you are open, when you are absolutely vulnerable in terms of accepting your weaknesses, there is a potential for immense growth and change. But if you only want to showcase the best selves in the world without being vulnerable about what are your limitations, then you probably are fooling yourself. Now, interestingly, in the whole Stanford speech, if you ever get a chance to listen to it, please do, and you will realize that Jobs is only talking about his grand failures. There are 3 narratives to that speech. This video is not about that specific Stanford speech, but there are certain nuanced learnings from that speech which I found of immense value. This ability to be open about his weakness, the ability to be openly talking about his failures is a mark of a leader. Because there's no person who was always perfect. Every master was once an amateur. Most of us live in this illusion when we look at stellar performance in any fields. be it cricket, be it the entertainment industry, and we feel that these people are made out of a different cloth. I remember SRK, when he was giving an interview, he told me in one of his recent interviews that even today there is a feeling of anxiety when he has to face that camera which has that green light ticking. Now, what this shows is this man is open about his weaknesses. This man is open and honest about his vulnerabilities. Because each human being has some amount of weakness. Each human being has a certain scope for improvement. And unless one is humble enough to acknowledge that scope of improvement, there is no scope of improvement. And the iconic aspect about titans and leaders is they don't view weakness as a weakness. They view weakness as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to course correct. This is something which is so unique to the A1 leaders. They are deeply vulnerable, they are deeply open about the fact that they too can fail. And I am reminded of a beautiful quote which says, "Nothing fails like success." And failure is the best teacher ever. No human being, no saint can teach you the amount of things which a failure can teach you. So, this whole perception, this whole way of approaching weaknesses and failure was completely different in Steve Jobs. And the fact that he was so open and he was so vulnerable showed that this man was truly authentic. And that is the reason why millions and billions of people are so inspired from this legend. So, next time, don't be shy from facing your vulnerabilities, from being open about your weaknesses. Because society has sold us this grand image of trying to be the best in everything you can, trying to showcase your best picture front of the world. While that is a good way to begin, in the sense that you have this perception building, that is not going to take you long. Because unless someone who is really honest, really vulnerable in terms of working on himself, in terms of developing his own understanding, the nuanced understanding of what are the possible flaws within him, and the fact that someone is so open about his own vulnerabilities speaks volumes about his confidence. Because only a confident person can openly talk about the weaknesses. Everybody can boast about their grand accomplishments, but only a person with spine and confidence can talk about his weaknesses, can talk about his failures. Now, the point, the very immense, very subtle point here is, some of us try to talk about our failures to garner sympathy. But Steve Jobs was not trying to garner sympathy. To the contrary, he was trying to be open about his challenges and his own fear of difficulties. Because people had this image about Steve Jobs that he was a supernatural genius, or he was cut out from a different cloth or a material. He completely debunked those myths. He just was trying to prove the point that I am as good as anyone who is listening to this Stanford speech. And that is the mark of a leader. So next time, be vulnerable, be open, be honest with your own self, and take a good audit of what are the things which I can work on. Because only then there's scope of improvements. And the next point I want to talk about is a thumb rule which Mr. Steve Jobs gave to the world in terms of decision making. He told in that particular speech, at the age 17, he had read a quote which made a profoundly deep impact on his psyche. He said, every day ask yourself this very important question, that if today was the last day of my life, what are the things which I would be doing and what are the things which I would not be doing? Now, he goes to say that this particular question, if I asked continuously for a period of days, and if the answer is no consecutively, that tells me that probably I need to course correct, probably I need to change something. I found this a phenomenal way to sort of make decisions. Because if you think about it, we all are a product of the choices we have made. Good or bad is a subjective reality. And this understanding of mortality with such a depth, because normally death is viewed very pessimistically. Most of us view death extremely pessimistically. And it is natural to view death pessimistically. But if you consider, if you truly understand the fact that death is something which can visit us any point of time, only then will one be able to fully relish the meaning of life. Because just think about it. Let's give a very simple example. Let's say, now this is just a hypothetical situation. Let's say that your personal doc, your family doc, calls you up and says that you only have 15 days to live. Do you think you'll waste your time gossiping about your neighbors, or do you think you'll waste your time doing frivolous activities which you otherwise would have indulged in had you had a lot of time? Definitely not. Your mind would immediately focus on the most important things. Now, these things can be different for different people. The important part is that it builds such deep focus, narrow focus on those important things that rest is completely stripped apart. Now, Steve Jobs had his own fair share of problems. His life was not an easy life. If you look at the life of any legend, it's never easy. But the fact is, he created a continuously amazing amount of perspective shift to the way he looked at those challenges. Also, the fact, this beautiful point of connecting to mortality is an absolute game changer, because it completely cuts down all the nonsense, which probably is not the best investment of your time and energy, and you're focused on those very simple things and those things which really need your attention. Now, this is such a powerful point, but if you deeply think about it, it will make a lot of sense to you. And he said that in that quote, when he was 17, he read this quote which said that always ask yourself, what would I do if today was the last day of my life? And one day you will be right. And one day you will be right. So essentially what that meant is, there is no escape. Death is a shared reality which each one of us shares. One day or the other, there is no escaping death. Steve Jobs talks about this. And he also apologizes for being very dramatic. But he says this, that this one thing probably changed a lot of things in his life. And now, if we apply this in our lives also, it makes so much sense. It makes so much meaning to have this mindset and operating when going through a day-to-day life. Because half of our time is wasted in frivolous activities, which probably don't have any head and tail. And once we have this monomaniacal understanding of this thought process, of this fact of life, death is the biggest fact of life. And once we can navigate, once we can view this understanding which Mr. Steve Jobs is bringing to the table, decision making becomes so easy, so absolutely easy. And most of our cognitive bandwidth, as according to modern day neuroscientists, most of our energy is lost in decision making because we have so many options. There are a plethora of options, and that leads to confusion. If you think about it at a micro level, let's not talk about the macro decisions of life. Let's talk about the micro decisions of life, because the micro decisions of life ultimately manifest into the macro decisions. And if you carefully observe the way you spend your day, the way you spend the time in your day, you will realize that your day is spent as an output of all the micro decisions you take. And if those micro decisions are anchored around this compass of connecting to our mortality, life starts suddenly becoming more meaningful. Hope this hack made sense to you. And the third hack, which Steve Jobs was known for, he said a quote which is sort of the trademark of Apple: simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I want to repeat that. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Albert Einstein said it so well when he said that I can gauge the depth of knowledge of a person. I can gauge the depth of knowledge of a person in his ability to teach that content or material to a 5-year-old. If you are able to teach whatever you are good at to a 5-year-old, that means you have mastered that particular content or skill or craft. Because let's understand, sophistication is easy. To simplify the difficult aspects is real hard work. Now, if you think about iPhone, right, the signature product of Apple, there are many things which are not there in iPhone which are there in the other phones. Steve Jobs believed in decluttering. Steve Jobs believed in this concept of minimalism. And he said that if I had to think about what needs to be reduced, I would have to go deep into the function which these things are creating. So for example, to simplify what he meant, let's say you have a machine with a lot of screws and you come up with this problem statement, you come up with this idea that I'm going to create a machine without screws. So for that, you need to really go deep into understanding what is the utility of those screws. What is the screw trying to do? What is the function of those screws? Because unless you understand the depth of the utility of that particular screw, you will not figure out a way to replace it. So what that essentially means is simplification is not a very easy process. To simplify something means that an individual has gone into the depth of that subject. If you look at these great teachers in JEE colleges or anyone who has been a very famous teacher, they are known for not their sophistication but their simplicity, their ability to explain difficult concepts, mammoth concepts, effortlessly. Now this is not only for this field, any field. Anyone who is able to simplify complicated things, he is a person who has a lot of depth, because only a person of depth can simplify. Hope my today's video gave you a lot of hacks which you and me can learn from Steve Jobs. If you really loved the video, enjoyed the video, do share this video with your community and do a service to the people around you, because these 3 hacks from Steve Jobs are probably not the most known aspects of his personality. We know him for all the other grand things, and that's perfectly fine. But these nuanced learnings also require our attention, also deserve our attention. Thank you so much for your time on my video. Thank you, and I'll meet you in the next video. Bye.